Welcome back to Required Reading, where we're continuing our read of Ghostbusters The Return. This is Chapter 10. Half an hour earlier, Jeanine and Louis had been sitting at a table in the Ghostbusters offices, poring through stacks of ancient leather-bound books. Jeanine preferred to assume they were leather anyway.
How fascinating,
Jeanine said.
Listen to this, Louis.
Louis closed the book he was reading and added it to the discard pile. Did you find something about Xanthador?
No, but according to this, if you want to get rid of nightmares, you should boil up some wine and oil with the tongue, eyes, liver, and bowels of a dragon, and then anoint the patient every morning and evening.
Gee, I usually just drink a cup of warm milk.
That works too.
Louis straightened the material of the Ghostbusters coveralls he was wearing and stole a glance at Jeanine, admiring his girlfriend's looks. For the 23rd time that day, he wondered what he'd done to deserve her. Absently, he opened yet another musty tome. As he lifted the cover, dust from the book scattered in the air, making him sneeze. In contrast to Louis's uniform, Jeanine was still dressed in the street clothes that she'd worn to work that morning, a form-fitting polyester dress in black and white zebra stripes.
Bless you,
she said. Louis looked up from the book. Thanks, he said, in a breathless tone that reflected deep, genuine appreciation, rather than an automatic reply. Catching his tone, Jeanine stopped reading in mid-sentence. She looked up at him, and their eyes met.
You're welcome,
she said meaningfully. The two of them gazed at each other with longing.
I just love a man in uniform,
she said. Me too, said Louis. Then realizing what he'd said, he hastened to add, I feel the same way. No, not that I love men in uniform, although I'm sure most of them are quite nice people. I love women who love men in uniform. Well, not just any women who love men in uniform. I was thinking more specifically. Jeanine silenced him with a deep, prolonged kiss. Then, with a single graceful stroke, she swept the stack of books off the table. Or she would have, if the oversized books hadn't been so big and heavy. What actually happened was that the stack of books refused to budge, as Jeanine discovered with a grunt. It took both hands and some help from Louis to shift the books to one side of the table. Once some spare space had been finally cleared, they threw their arms around each other and started to kiss passionately. Intertwined, they fell across the table in the midst of the volumes that lay there. The dust from the books made Louis sneeze. Meanwhile, over in the kitchen, Slimer was trying an experiment of a different kind. He studied a brand new 5-pound plastic bag of unpopped popcorn, feeling the heft of its weight in his hands, and admiring the label's photo of a skinny man in glasses and a bow tie. His eyes moved to one end of the bag. In a single sharp movement, Slimer yanked hard in both directions, sending up a shower of popcorn kernels as the end of the bag burst open. The effect made him laugh, although he was careful to keep most of the popcorn in the bag. He didn't want to lose too much of it before he tried out his idea. Next, he floated over to the microwave oven and opened the door. He started to pour the bag of popcorn inside, thus creating a large growing heap in the middle of the floor of the microwave. Midway through the process, he abruptly cut off the flow of popcorn when he was struck by a new thought. He took a handful of the unpopped kernels and dropped them into his mouth. Then he took careful aim and spit out a stream of kernels like a machine gun. They bounced off the frying pan in the drying rack beside the sink with a loud ringing clang-ang-ang-ang-ang-ang. Slimer giggled heartily. He was still giggling when he turned back to the microwave and added the rest of the bag of popcorn. Once the bag was empty, he slammed the door, Push the button to set the microwave for 6 hours, then hit the button marked Start. As the microwave lit up and began its work with a quiet hum, Slimer positioned himself horizontally in mid-air beneath the microwave. He opened his mouth wide and waited to see how long it would take for the popcorn to force the door of the microwave open and cascade down into his mouth. The popcorn was just starting to pop when he was startled by the sound of a voice. "Oh my, you poor dear. Just look at you. You're absolutely soaked." Baffled, Slimer drifted aimlessly into an upright position as he tried to figure out what was most puzzling: the presence of an elderly woman in the kitchen, the fact that he actually wasn't soaked at all, or the fact that, like him, she was drifting in the middle of the room without any legs to support her. Slimer spoke in a stream of gibberish that sounded something like a question. "Don't worry, dearie," said the ghost of the old woman. "I know just how to fix what ails you." Before Slimer could protest or even react, she pushed the button that simultaneously paused the microwave and opened the door. In a single fluid motion, she reached inside, used her hand to sweep the pile of popcorn kernels, both popped and unpopped, out of the microwave. The kernels fell in a graceful shower that hit the floor and bounced all over the room. Slimer was so startled by the whole thing and transfixed by the shower of popcorn that he didn't even put up any resistance when she suddenly grabbed his arm, shoved him inside the microwave, and slammed the door. By the time Slimer realized what was happening, his rotund body was already stuffed into the too small space. He tried to move, but with his body filling the space, the best he could manage was a slight, helpless jiggle of one arm. Before he could think to dematerialize and pass through the walls of the microwave, the old woman hit the start button. "There you are, dearie," she said. "You'll be dry as a bone in no time." Slimer didn't feel so well. His superheated body started to bubble and bulge. The old woman watched through the window of the microwave. She smiled pleasantly and started to hum a happy tune. The bubbling was getting faster now, stronger, more out of control. Panic registered on the distorted mass that was now barely recognizable as Slimer's face. Faster and faster, the reaction multiplied exponentially in speed and intensity. In a matter of seconds, it raised to a fever pitch, and Slimer exploded. The door of the microwave blew open in a mass of black smoke and green sludge. The bits of slime that splattered across the room were all that was left of the Ghostbusters' pet poltergeist. "Oh, my," said the old woman. "What a mess." Louis and Jeanine were still sprawled across the table, and he was still sneezing, when she opened her eyes to see that they weren't alone. The visitor was a tall, slender man with dark hair, dark eyes, and swarthy good looks. He wore a silk shirt and tight pants and an embroidered red jacket that looked like something Jeanine might have expected to see on a bullfighter or a waiter in a Mexican restaurant. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, Jeanine tried desperately to salvage whatever bit of professionalism she could still muster. "Excuse me. I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, struggling to pry herself loose from her awkward position beneath Louis. The visitor waited patiently for her, a bemused smile playing across his lips. Still muttering apologies, Jeanine dropped down to her feet and hastily began straightening her clothes and hair. Only then, as Louis's sneezing fit started to subside, did he notice the visitor himself. "Oh, hi," Louis said. His glasses were askew, his hair was mussed, and he couldn't help looking sheepish from his position atop the table. With all the grace of a baby calf finding its legs for the first time, he clambered down the table. He tried to zip up the front of his coveralls, only to discover that the zipper was stuck in the halfway position. As Louis muttered to himself and struggled to free the zipper, Jeanine stepped up to the visitor. She'd done her best for a quick fix-up, but with her hair in disarray and her lipstick smeared across her mouth and cheeks, the effect was moderate at best.
"Sorry about that," she said. "Welcome to the Ghostbusters. How can I help you?"
The visitor did not reply, at least not in words. Instead, he thrust one arm upward and the other across his torso in a dramatic pose. Jeanine didn't notice the castanets in his hands at first, but they seemed to come alive as their clacking accompanied the sound of his shoes striking the floor in a brief, fast-paced dance step that ended as abruptly as it had begun.
"Oh, wow,"
said Jeanine. She found herself fascinated, albeit a little perplexed, by the spectacle in front of her. She wasn't used to people dancing through the office in the middle of the afternoon. Somewhere behind her, Louis was still tugging on the stubborn zipper. He started jumping up and down in an attempt to shake it loose. Jeanine didn't notice. She couldn't take her eyes off the mysterious flamenco dancer, whose feet were now tapping against the floor as he slowly circled around her. She stared at him, entranced, as he directed smoldering glances deep into her eyes. When he completed the circle, the dancer threw back with a flourish and extended a hand towards her. Meanwhile, Louis was still jumping and tugging on the zipper. At least he was until he smacked into a nearby filing cabinet, lost his balance, and fell over. Jeanine didn't even look in the direction of the crash to see if Louis was all right. She took the visitor's hand, and he led her over to the open space between the office area and the parking bay. With fluid grace, he slid an arm around her waist, pressed his cheek against hers, and guided her back and forth across the floor. She closed her eyes, enjoying the sensual feel of the dance. The visitor moved with measured precision, and as long as Jeanine followed his lead, she moved with a grace that she never knew she possessed. Louis managed to get back up on his feet. To his delight, he discovered that the fall had jarred the zipper loose. He zipped the coveralls up with pleasure, then turned to see the handsome stranger hoisting his girlfriend high over his head and spinning around before gently setting her down again. "Hey, guys," Louis said. "What you doing?" Jeanine could barely hear him. Louis's voice sounded distant, as though it was coming from far, far away. The sensation was like being underwater or lost in a dream, as the visitor twirled her away from himself, then caught her and pulled her back. Jeanine found herself falling madly, deeply in love. Jeanine opened her eyes to gaze into the face of her new love. She smelled his scent and felt the strength of his powerful arms. Then she looked down and screamed. To be fair, it was an understandable reaction. The rhythmic clicking of her partner's heels didn't actually come from his shoes. He wasn't wearing any shoes, nor did he have heels, at least not the kind that Jeanine was expecting. Instead, the clicking was coming from the long, sharp claws that extended from her partner's 6 toes and the spur that protruded from the back of each foot. He had the feet of a chicken. And when she looked back up into his horrible laughing face, she discovered that he had horns as well. Suddenly, the floor opened up all around them. Flames licked upward from somewhere deep below. The roar of the fire was accompanied by the screams and moans of a million tortured souls. Only the small piece of floor beneath Jeanine's feet hovered above the pit. "Jeanine!" shouted Louis.
"Louis!"
she screamed in reply. "Hold on! I'll save you!" Louis started to rush towards the pit, but he was stopped cold by a firm grip on his shoulder. He turned to see a hulking, twisted, translucent fiend. It grunted, drool dribbling down his chin. Its hands held a large axe. With what was probably intended to be a smile, the fiend opened its mouth and said, "Have you checked the children?" Before Lewis could do anything more than look confused, it swung the heavy axe directly at his head. Winston just didn't buy it. "You're telling me Ray blamed you for getting them fired?" "That's right. The man was totally unreasonable," said Venkman. "Ray did that." "Uh-huh. Ray." "Yes, Ray," said Venkman. "Guy about this tall, baby face, nicotine patch?" "No way." "You weren't on the phone. You didn't hear him." "Come on. Ray? Ray's a pussycat. You must have misunderstood." "Aha! Don't let him fool you. Under all that niceness, he's got a real nasty streak." Winston rolled his eyes and sighed. Milken cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, much as I hate to interrupt, we do have work to do." "Right. Sorry," said Winston. The two of them rejoined Milken down at the end of the conference table. Venkman still looked a bit out of sorts, but he gave his body a little shake and got down to business with the others. "Now, we'll have to do something about this Goodraven character," Milken said. Affecting a Brooklyn accent, Venkman said, "I could have Lifty and the boys rub him out." Milken smiled indulgently. "I'll speak to John about adapting our campaign strategy to accommodate Goodraven, but knowing John, he's probably already working on it." "Bet your guys never saw something like this coming. Must be throwing them for a loop," said Winston. "Actually," said Milken, "we knew that something like this was possible." "You did?" "Certainly. Stands to reason. They based so much of their campaign on the Ghostbusters that they needed a substitute when there was no longer an option. The mayor couldn't continue to give your group free publicity once you boys were running against him." "Really?" said Winston, shooting Venkman a sidelong, "I told you so" look. Venkman grimaced momentarily, but stayed focused on the task at hand. "So you've already found a way to deal with the Spud?" "Spud?" Winston translated. "He means Goodraven." "Ah, well, naturally we couldn't assemble too specific a plan before we knew whom the mayor might appoint, but we do have a more general strategy in place, now that we know that Goodraven is the one we can run a thorough check on his background." "You mean dig up dirt?" said Venkman. "If you prefer. Once we have that information in hand, we should be able to discredit him and cut the mayor's support out from under him again." "But what if there isn't enough dirt on Goodraven?" asked Winston. Milken gave him a patronizing smile. "There's enough dirt on everyone." As the Fiend swung its heavy axe, Lewis instinctively recoiled, only to trip over his own feet. He fell backwards, hitting the floor as the axe sailed over him and smashed through the front of a file cabinet.
Lewis!
Screamed Jeanine. Frantically, Lewis tried to scramble away while the Fiend struggled to pull the axe free of the cabinet. But from his position sprawled out on his back, Lewis couldn't move more than a couple of inches before the Fiend ripped out the axe and raised it high over his head.
"Have you checked the children?"
In the split second before the axe could come down to complete its deadly arc, Ray and Egon burst through the front door like the cavalry on the attack. In a flash, they took in the scene and raced into action. "I'll get him!" Ray shouted to Egon. "You take El Diablo!" "Right," said Egon. The next thing Lewis and Jeanine knew, a blinding pair of ion streams tore across the room to bind the two specters. The Fiend tried to free itself by slashing at the beams with the axe, but to no avail. Ray wrapped the stream around him, pinning his arms to his sides. The Fiend and the Devil howled in anger. As one, Ray and Egon leaned back, hoisting the murderous roaring spirits into the air. "Okay," Ray called, shouting to be heard over the din. "Now we just have to get him in the trap." "Right," Egon called back. "Where is it?" Ray shot Egon a concerned glance before focusing his attention back on restraining the Fiend. "Didn't you bring one in with us?" "I thought you brought it in." Without an ecto-trap, they'd have to stand there, holding the ghosts, but the instant one of them went to get a trap, one of the ghosts would be free. "Jeanine," called Egon, "hurry! Go get us a trap!"
How?
she called back. Although the devil was restrained, she was still surrounded by his flaming pit. "Lois," Ray said, "you've got to do it. Go get a trap." "Okay," Lois replied. "Where are they?" "In the back, in the first file cabinet." "Gotcha." Lois started to run back behind the office area, but stopped after a couple of steps. "The first one on the right or the left?" Ray thought for a second. "The right." "The big gray one?" "No, the black one." "Never mind," shouted Egon. "Just go outside and get one from the car." "Gotcha." "One that isn't smoking," added Ray. "Okay." Lewis ran past them and was halfway down the parking bay when he stopped and turned back towards them. "I don't have any keys." It was getting harder to hold the writhing ghosts. They couldn't pull free, but their struggling was jerking the ion beams around, making it difficult to keep them steady. Ray's beam grazed a fluorescent light that was hanging on the ceiling, and the bulb exploded. "It's not locked!" Egon shouted to Lewis. "In New York City? You know, that really isn't safe." "Get the trap!" they screamed. "Gotcha." As the seconds ticked by, it felt like Lewis was gone for an eternity. But before long, he ran back into the headquarters with the trap in his hands. "Here it is." "Great," said Ray. "Lay it down on the floor over there and then stomp on the pedal." Lewis did as he was told. Instantly, an inverted pyramid of light shot up out of the trap. In a matter of moments, the ghosts were gone. The trap snapped shut, and the axe fell to the floor with a metallic clang. Once the ghost disappeared into the trap, the fiery pit around Jeanine vanished, reverting back into the building's usual floor. Gingerly, she tested the floor with her toe to make sure it was solid. Then, once she was reasonably sure that it was, she ran over to Lewis. The two of them threw their arms around each other. As they shut down the power on their proton packs, Ray wiped the sweat off his brow, and Egon breathed a sigh of relief. "You were right," said Egon. "That urban legend is a bad one." "Someone's raising the stakes. Just be glad we got here in time." Egon stood over Ray, watching as Ray crouched down to collect the trap. Neither of them saw the ghost of the old lady that drifted noiselessly behind them, high above the floor. After all, neither of them knew that there had also been a third ghost. Not until a moment later, when the old lady soared down, grabbed the fallen axe, and charged at them, screaming, "Die! Die for Santador!" Simultaneously, Ray and Egon grabbed for their neutrino wands. The axe whistled through the air as the old lady swung it around in a roundhouse arc. The swing could have taken off both of their heads, in a single blow, that is, if it wasn't for the timely arrival of a fighting mad Slimer. He looked battered, bruised, blackened, and really, really irate. He zoomed through the air at breathtaking speed to body slam the old lady with his considerable bulk before she could complete her deadly swing. The impact sent the old lady tumbling head over heels through the air. It took almost the entire length of the building for her to recover and come around for a second try. This time, though, the Ghostbusters were ready. Ray waited until she was committed to her charge and too close to change course. He stamped on the pedal of the ecto-trap. The old lady soared straight into the light and vanished before the trap snapped shut. Once again, the only remaining trace was the axe that fell to the floor. Usually, saving the day brought a rush of triumph and joy because of both the victory and the simple fact of survival. But not this time. This one had been a little too close. Everyone stared grimly at the smoking trap. Ray gave Slimer a high five. "Thanks, buddy." Slimer muttered some gibberish in reply. Egon gazed at everyone in the room. "Now, before we make further assumptions, are there any more ghosts beside these three?" Jeanine, Lewis, and Slimer shook their heads. "Good," said Ray. To Egon he added,
Xanthador again.
But it's not cower before Xanthador anymore, Egon replied.
Nope, now it's die. And this one was intended specifically for us.
Agreed. The odds against this being a coincidence are astronomical. Still, it seems like a lot of effort for a small target. Why would they bother?
I guess because we've been fighting against them.
Egon nodded, digesting the point. If that's true, I'd say Jonathan Goodraven chose a bad time to move to New York.
You know what? Said Ray. Forget Goodraven. Forget the whole competition thing. We just gotta get these guys once and for all.
What changed your mind?
They just made it personal.